You're both experienced and intrepid travellers. What were your plans and expectations when you set off on your holiday?
We were looking forward to another cruise. We've cruised a lot, particularly in the last 5 years.
A 10-day cruise around the Caribbean, and which we got back to Fort Lauderdale on the 5th of March. And then the second component, after spending a day in Fort Lauderdale, was to then do 20 days to end up in Venice. We started to get people that were unwell, and they were dropped off at the various ports. We were not given any information as to the fact that they were COVID positive. That information came out later, and on the 5 days into the cruise, we've then found out that things were getting a little bit more serious. They shut down all the entertainment. More people were getting sicker by the day. Margaret, at this time, was starting to become rather breathless and contained to a room. She thought she had bronchitis and dealt with it accordingly. She went to the doctor during that period, and by the 15th, Sunday the 15th, we all got locked in our rooms. And I use the word a little loosely, that we got locked in our rooms. We were contained to our rooms is probably a better description. And we were brought our meals, etc. Margaret was continuing to get unwell, went to the doctor again. Nurse told her that maybe she should eat white rice. Anyway, I think she had a meal of that, but continued to get further unwell. We couldn't get into any of the ports that we were due to get into because each of those countries were closing down, and normally would cruise at about 18 knots, and the captain had obviously decided we needed to get to Marseille, which was the next port that was still open, and we were doing 24 knots to achieve that. We'd been getting temperature checked each day, and Margaret and I were obviously 2 of 75 people across the ship that had variations in temperature. So we actually got tested by the French. They dropped Americans, and Canadians were then sent back by a aircraft to Atlanta, because at that time things were starting to hot up in Italy. And Margaret went to the hospital again that day, and continued to be unwell, but didn't get much assistance at that time. Saturday we got into Savona in Italy, and they started to continue to get people off the ship. By this time also we hadn't had any internet for a couple of days, so we didn't know what was going on in the outside world, and on the Sunday afternoon we got it back, and there was an email from Embassy asking us whether we had any results from our COVID tests on the 19th, and I said no. Margaret went to the doctor again. I took her down, and we were sent straight back. And were given masks. So I think the medical staff may have known that we were positive by this stage, although we didn't. They came back and assessed Margaret, 2 of the doctors, said they'd either be back in the morning or she'd be getting ambulanced off. Embassy were in touch again, asked us whether we were happy with the medical support, and we said, well, lead it.
No.
Yeah. It needed a bit to be desired. So Margaret was actually taken off the ship by ambulance about 8 o'clock that night, supposedly for an X-ray in the local hospital. And about 3 hours later, I was actually notified by the embassy that we were both positive. And when Margaret was going off, I thought I was going with her. So we actually had a small bag for her and, of course, tablets, phones, etc. Right at the last moment, they said, no, you're staying behind. So Margaret was just about unconscious by this time, so it wasn't well enough to say, give me my phone. Of course, she went off that night, I mean. And the following day, I'm thinking she'll come back, but she didn't. By this time, we're also in touch with our relatives back in Australia. We didn't know where she was, and our daughter works for Optus, worked with an Italian girl whose father rang the hospital in Savona to basically act as though he was me, and wanted to know where his wife Margaret was. And then we found out she'd been transferred during the night to an infectious diseases hospital in Genoa, where she was. And it was 5 days. She was unconscious, I believe, for about 5 days. We didn't actually talk for 10 days, and that was after I'd got an Italian SIM, after running up a bit of a bill with our mobile. And then I also got the embassy to arrange a SIM and phone for Margaret. So we actually spoke for the first time after 10 days, which was rather an emotional conversation. And during this time, a lot of people talked about lack of taste. Well, I had a bottle of wine in the fridge that I hadn't touched, and opened it that night after we'd had a conversation, but it took me 5 days to drink it. So yes, I can understand that. I've got that taste back since then, fortunately. And so it was another 10 days before we actually saw each other, but at least we were able to communicate after day 10. And of course, each day was, this is day one. After 2 days she was off. I actually got taken off the ship as well. Most of the Australians were taken to Rome, but myself and 2 others from Western Australia, along with a number of other people, were taken to a military hospital in Turon, and that's where I was from the 24th, so 2 days after Margaret had been taken off.
Margaret, your background is in nursing, and they're extremely challenging and probably frightening times for you.
I felt very isolated, obviously. The doctors could speak English to a certain degree, but none of the nurses could, which made their job obviously very challenging. And they were probably very busy. I didn't know how sick I was. I didn't know until after I got home how sick I'd been. Probably if I'd known, I would have been frightened, but I wasn't. I felt quite serene. Some of the experiences were very upsetting, and I try to forget them. But
very different to the type of medical experiences you yourself had been used to here in Australia.
I have had some challenging times medically in the last 20 years, and I've always felt very supported and all the nursing and allied health and medical staff that I've ever had anything to do with were totally supportive, whereas I didn't find that in Italy.
No. So, David, how far away was your hospital?
There were times, I think, when they discussed that if I could get my 2 negatives, I might be relocated down there, close to her. And then there was a time when they said the same thing to Margaret when she actually got out ahead of me, that she might come down, but she actually spent time in a hotel.
I found out why we could never get together, and it was because, like in Australia, where the states, the borders have closed.
Oh yeah, we were in a different province. And the provinces closed their borders.
Right.
And there was only essential travel between the provinces.
Yeah. So, David, what was your greatest concern being away from Margaret?
Well, I think each day in those early times when she first went off was not knowing exactly, it was the unknown, I suppose, not being able to talk. I mean, even when Margaret has worked away in the past, we probably talk to each other 3, 4, 5 times a day. So to not have any communication, it was just really difficult, that unknown as to how unwell she was. There was a couple of times when I asked nursing staff I had the phone number of where she was by that time, but not being able to speak Italian, that didn't really do me much good. But I tried to get a couple of the staff. One of them did ring on my behalf. Each day we would actually get a call from the embassy, as would Margaret when she became conscious. And that helped with the communication, but in that early part, it was just really unknown as to how unwell she was, and whether I was going to see her again, and being 2 hours away as well. And I think that would have also been the issue if she had become worse because of this province scenario, whether I would have been allowed to actually go and visit her. That probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, so re-establishing your communication was
paramount.
Paramount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that day 10 was a biggie.
Yeah. So eventually, Margaret, you were well enough to be allowed to leave hospital, to be discharged?
Yes,
But
after 2 negative.
Yeah. So how long was that?
You had another 3 days. Oh, you'd been in hospital, was it 11?
I think I was in hospital for 17 days.
Yeah, about that, yeah.
17 days. And then I was transferred. I had the choice to be going to it was probably a government-owned step-down facility. They took me there, but I had the choice of going to a hotel. And I thought I needed the support that I was going to get at the step-down facility, because I couldn't walk very far. And I felt very weak. But I got to this step-down facility, and by the time I'd been there for an hour or 2, I realised that it had, I guess, the best of a hotel, in the sense that you were in a place that wasn't a hospital, but the worst of a hotel as well, in the sense that there was nobody, you weren't allowed to leave your room. I was in a single room. There was no TV, there was no facilities. I mean, I didn't have a TV in the hospital either, but there wasn't anything to watch. And the lady, Maria, from the embassy rang at that time, when I'm looking around thinking, oh my God, how long am I going to be here? And there was very little staff. They put your meals outside the door, and you saw nobody. And
Very isolating.
It was even worse than the hospital.
Yeah.
So this lady rang from the embassy and I said, oh, I've made the wrong choice. And she said, no problem, we'll get you into a hotel. And within an hour, I was picked up and taken to the most beautiful hotel in the middle of Genoa, in the middle of the main street. It was just bizarre, the main street of Genoa, and there was nobody. No traffic, no foot traffic, nothing. And this beautiful hotel, really, really old, that had been meticulously renovated. And I was on the 6th floor, thank God there was a lift. And the only person I ever saw was the person in the on the desk. He was very helpful. He helped me order my meals because they didn't have the restaurant. I found out that there were a few other people in the hotel. There was somebody jogging around the rooms, and that was their exercise. They had their mask on and they're jogging. So I spent 3 days there.
And talking about the Chilean lady too.
And the night before I left there, a Chilean lady, you told me that there was somebody on the same floor as me who had been in the same room as me at the hospital. I have no recollection of her whatsoever.
And her granddaughter was in the same facility as me.
As David,
Right.
yeah.
Gosh.
So we got together that night and shared a pizza, and then we were together the next morning when they picked us up in the bus.
So the two of you were still apart in different hospitals?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
20 days.
20 days?
Yes,
It's a long time, isn't it?
longest time in the world.
And David, tell me a little bit about what life was like for you in your hospital, because it was quite different, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a military hospital, but it was like, I think I call it a pseudo-military hospital because probably was used maybe in the war, and they've sort of pulled it together for this particular provision. I think there may have been downstairs may have actually been military people, but no services like tea and coffee, were available, and that was sort of pretty. I like my couple of coffees every morning, but the chap across the road, across the corridor, of course, another WA person, he and I actually had an urn, submersible element, and he actually had the tea and coffee, no sugar or milk, but at least so it was my job to actually do the boiling, and he had a couple of thermoses, fortunately. That lasted us a few days, and then there was the talk of me getting relocated to Margaret's area, and I thought I'd left my European connection for power back in Australia, and I'd borrowed Steve's, and I was doing all the charging of all the tablets, so that was sort of kept me occupied in one way each day. And I thought, I need another element if I'm going to be leaving the hotel, leaving this hospital. And I then remembered that the person who'd got me the person that could speak English was a guy called Franco. And Franco, I contacted, and I said, we need some tea and coffee and milk. Any chance you can get it. And he said, yeah, no problem. And when he got to the shop, he actually asked, was there anything else we wanted? I said, chocolate. Anyway, he had this all delivered to the hotel, to our hospital, I gave one of the chocolates to my comrade across the corridor, and we were right. We had milk and tea and coffee and sugar, and so that part was good, and he got the connection that I needed. So that was all good, and so I suppose we just continued to battle on, and I'd be in contact with our daughter Rachel and granddaughter Chantel. They set up a Facebook page for people like us that were on the Luminosa. So that was really great because they'd actually been on TV back here on the 25th of March, indicating that their parents and grandparents were overseas, and so I'd contact them each day and we'd converse about any medical reports between Margaret and myself and how each was all going, and so that's that was sort of our daily routine. I was rather fatigued. That was my major thing. So I did a bit of sleeping in between, and then of course you got your temperature checks, and meals were pretty ordinary. Like pasta you didn't get any nice sauce with it. It was by contractor. You might get a bowl of cauliflower and a bowl of carrots and a bowl of pasta. I'd put it all together and sort of try and mix it. So fortunately I didn't lose any weight because I actually ate, but my friend Steve across the corridor, he lost 5 kilos during this because he didn't eat it much.
So eventually you got to leave hospital. What was that like?
Well, it's interesting because we had our first test on, I think it was something like the 5th of April, and anyway, we got the results a couple of days later, and then had the second test on the 8th, and everyone else in the facility except me got their results on the Friday night. And this Chilean lady, who was actually the daughter of the lady that was in this facility with Margaret, she contacts me on WhatsApp from Chile saying, "You're going tomorrow morning to pick Margaret and my mum up in Genoa." And I said, well, that's if I can get a result, And she said, "Oh, well, I'd pack my bag if I was you." So I did. Anyway, we were supposed to be leaving at 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 20 to 10, I got my results. Supposedly they were negative. I'm just not sure whether they were. I think they wanted to get rid of me by that stage because I was sort of, giving a bit of lip, I suppose, saying,
I can't imagine that, David.
and saying, well, when's the results coming through? And the embassy were ringing me as well, and of course we didn't actually leave until 25 past 11, but be that as it may, we then got across took a couple of hours, and I think we ended up leaving Genoa about 2 o'clock, and it was a 6-hour run to Rome, where we all went to a hotel there, got met by the ambassador.
So that trip home was quite challenging, wasn't it? Do you want to describe what that was like?
Yeah.
Because I was flabbergasted when you told me.
Yeah, we spent the night in Genoa at this hotel. It was a B&B.
No, Rome.
Rome, sorry. In Rome. We didn't leave until I think about lunchtime, and we managed to connect to the Easter Sunday service, because it was actually Easter Sunday. Was it actually from Rome? Was it from
from the Vatican.
Yeah, from the Vatican. Anyway, we left there after lunch.
We saw it on TV.
Yeah.
The Easter Sunday Mass.
Yeah.
And it was in German.
Yeah.
There you go.
From the Vatican.
Yeah, and then we got to the airport, and we had our first flight, which was Air Italia, from Rome to Munich. That was only a relatively short flight. There was 5 of us on that flight, including Margaret and I. No food, none of that sort of stuff. But I suppose it was only about a 2-hour run, so it wasn't anything.
It was fine.
Yeah. We got to Munich. That was the interesting point. We were the last plane in for the day, and the airport was in the process of actually closing for the day. None of the shops were open. And each section we went through, they're thinking, these guys are not leaving until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. How do we deal with them? They're not allowed out of the airport, but they're not going until tomorrow. So in the end, they kept checking with their supervisor and would be allowed through the next section. And, in the end, they just sort of threw up their hands and thought, well, we really can't do anything. They're going to have to stay here. So we had 16 hours layover in Munich Airport, which is about the equivalent of Sydney, empty. And the only people there were security and police. And they said, well, do you want us to get you some food? So we gave them, I think it was €30. And they went and got us food from the...
Outside the airport.
Outside the airport. The police went and got it. And it was enough for dinner and for breakfast. And got us some blankets. And we slept on those hard seats during the course of the night. And they'd check on us every now and then. And then the following morning we flew from Munich to Doha. I think it was about a 6-hour flight from memory. And there was 6 of us on that plane, including Margaret and I. Then we had a short layover in Doha. And then we did the Air Qatar. That was a Qatar plane. And we also did a Qatar from Doha, an A380. And there was 5 people in business class and 10 in economy, including Margaret and I.
Good
It was bizarre.
Yeah,
and
it's very surreal. Yeah.
So we got back on the 14th, back into Sydney.
So you arrive back in Sydney and you're going to quarantine.
Yes, and we were so glad to be on Australian soil.
Did you get down and kiss the ground?
Nearly.
Almost.
Yes.
Must have been a great relief to get back.
It was.
Yeah, yeah.